Hello. How is everybody on this fine day? It is the first day of October in the year of our Lord 2022. It's a nice warm day here in the Treasure Valley, although it was chilly in the morning, which is nice. It means that fall is here. Summer's not going forever, despite what the climate change alarmists say. So the Idaho's candidate for the Democrat candidate for lieutenant governor on Twitter saying that, doesn't matter what people say, I feel that climate change is real, or something to that effect. Basically saying that because it feels warm, that means we need to institute some socialist government that's going to take away our cars, more or less. So, my name is Brian. I'm with, I write for GemState.substack.com, which I had a new piece out yesterday about the library board issue, which I'll chat about in a few minutes. Emails are not working for some reason. This last piece, the emails did not go out to subscribers. So if you are a subscriber, you might have to go to the website and actually see it. I'm in touch with Substack support. We'll figure it out. My wife thinks maybe I flew too close to the sun and now I've been banned, but I don't think that's the case. Substack has been very good about protecting free speech, so I'm sure it's just a glitch and we'll get it worked out. I also have a new piece coming soon for IFF. I've been working on it. I need to actually address that today. So as I have time, got some events this evening, but maybe after this is done and before those start, I can work on that. It never ends, does it? So I stopped watching professional sports a couple years ago because for a couple of reasons. I lived in Western Washington, so I was a fan of all the local teams. I enjoyed watching the Sonics. I remember when they made the playoffs, or made the NBA Finals in 1996 against Michael Jordan and the Bulls. That was a lot of fun, even though they lost. Was a fan of the Mariners and the Seahawks. Mariners had some good years in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a time when I listened to every single game on the radio, and that was fun. I enjoyed the radio even more than TV, just because it was Dave Niehaus and Rick Riz were so much fun to listen to. And watched the Seahawks. Obviously, they finally made their Super Bowl about 10 years ago now. But I eventually stopped watching just because, for one thing, I realized I was wasting way too much time and energy following these things. It's not enough to just catch the games. You have to keep up with sports radio and the news and what's happening with this player and that player. And it was just taking up way too much time. And I found myself getting way too emotionally invested in it. And that brings me to what I was going to say today, is that I saw that the Mariners finally made the playoffs for the first time since 2001. They won their game last night, game-winning home run in the bottom of the ninth, pinch hit home run to win the game and clinch a playoff berth, which is exciting. I mean, all those years after they made the playoffs in 2001 with one of the best teams in baseball history, you'd think this is the beginning of a dynasty, but no, it was the beginning of the end. And they came close a few times, but they never made it until yesterday. So I popped it into the Reddit message boards to see what people were talking about, and it was fun to catch up on that, that world that I've left behind. But also, so many people were just explaining how emotionally involved they were. People, mostly, I assume, grown men, were talking about how they were crying, sobbing, bawling because it was so emotional, and talking about how this was the greatest moment of their lives. We did it. We made the playoffs. And, that's exactly why I gave that up, because I think there are more important things to invest in emotionally. People get so invested in something that in this case is not, it's really, they're just entirely spectators. You spend your time, energy, money, and your emotional energy on this game that is not there. It's really not connected to your life. There's nothing that you can do to affect it. You're not out there playing. These millionaires who play a child's game are not, they don't know you, but you're invested in them. It's like very much a vicarious thing, a parasocial relationship. But if you enjoy it, I'm not going to condemn you. It is fun, and I do miss watching, keeping up on baseball back in the day. But so congratulations to the Mariners for finally making the playoffs after a 21-year drought, the longest playoff drought in professional sports history, or not history, but in professional sports currently. So, moving on to things that are a little bit more relevant. My latest piece for GemState was about, my previous one at the beginning of this week was about Idaho's radical Democrats, because I've been following the Democrat candidates here in District 14, my own district, just keeping an eye on them. And I really have been resisting the urge to engage. As I see them post this or that on Facebook or on other social media, I've just been watching. I haven't engaged. I haven't argued. I haven't said anything. And that really has taken a little bit of self restraint there, because I do enjoy the process of engaging. I do enjoy getting out there and having the battle of ideas, the battle of wits. But I've just been watching and keeping an eye on what they're saying and how they're campaigning. And it seems like on the surface, their campaign is very middle of the road, centrist. We don't want to talk about the controversial issues. We don't want to talk about social issues. We just want to talk about what brings us together. Democrat candidate Crystal Ivey's campaign slogan is "We're better together." That's one of those things that sounds nice, but if you spend more than 5 seconds thinking about it, you realize how empty and vapid it really is. What does it even mean? It just means vote for me, because that's the essence of any campaign, isn't it? So they're presenting themselves as non-controversial, but really, if you scratch the surface, you see that they are radical. Whether it's Crystal Ivey or Shelley Brock or Terry Pickens Manweiler, Kelsey Mosley Morris, David Roth, any of these other Democrat candidates, they really are crazy radical. I finally did respond on, not directly, but I posted in a conservative group about Crystal Ivey's attack on our Republican candidate in her race, Ted Hill. Now, Ted Hill is a 40-year Navy veteran who just retired. He's still working 2 jobs, and he's also running for the legislature. He won a very contested 4-way primary in May, and now he's facing Crystal Ivey. I mean, you compare the two of them, and it's obvious who should win this. You have the Navy veteran, husband, father, grandfather, man who's done so much for his country, and now he's coming back to represent his community in the legislature. On the other hand side, you have a young woman who, middle-aged woman, I guess. I don't want to, cast aspersions there, but she's been a Boise State professor of, biology, but apparently she doesn't understand biology. A former student of hers shared with me a presentation she gave and it's supposed to be a class on genetics, but Professor Ivey took this opportunity to share her feelings about gender as a spectrum. Here, let me show this to you. So there's several pages like this, but this is really representative of where she was going. It says sex is a biological categorization based primarily on reproductive potential. Sexuality is the way people experience and express themselves sexually, biological, erotic, physical, emotional, social, or spiritual feelings. And there we go. And behaviors. Gender is a social elaboration of biological sex. However, nature and nurture intertwine. There's no obvious point at which sex leaves off and gender begins. You get the picture here. You have some pictures of gender-bending people over there on the right. You have this thing on the left. Why do we entertain this? Girls' toys, boy toys, because boys don't cuddle and girls don't build. See, this is interesting. This is really interesting. You know why? Because back in the 90s, I remember when feminist groups were really pushing back on what they called gendered toys or gendered advertising for toys. Because girls' toys are dolls and boys' toys are Legos, stereotypically. And they said, well, wait a second. Boys can play with dolls and girls can play with Legos. And that's true. I mean, advertisers are going to go where they think they're going to get the most bang for their buck. And, on average, more girls are going to want to play with dolls and more boys are going to want to play with Legos. Now, I have both girls and boys in my children. And so I've seen this in how they grow up. Sometimes the boys like to play with dolls, usually not in the same way that a girl does. And of course, my daughter likes to play with Legos and likes to build things, and that's fine. What's interesting about this, and in the way that Professor Ivey is using it in this presentation, is that now LGBTQ activists have completely flipped the script from where feminists were 20 years ago. Whereas they used to say that just because a boy plays with dolls doesn't mean anything, or just because a girl plays with Legos doesn't mean, she's a tomboy or lesbian or something. They've completely flipped that. And now you have people with straight faces, parents and activists and medical professionals saying that if your 2-year-old daughter is playing with Legos, then that is a sign that she might be transgender or non binary, and we should start a program of hormones and maybe even surgery. If your son, if your toddler boy is playing with dolls, he might be non binary or transgender, and we should start you should start putting him in dresses. So, I don't know. This presentation is presumably from a few years ago. So perhaps Professor Ivy hadn't heard the latest memo, because that's the thing about leftists. They're always having to keep up with these changes in the zeitgeist. And they get these memos, these diktats that come out and tell them where they have to be, what rhetoric they have to use. And so the idea that, it's okay for boys and girls to play with whatever toys they want, that's actually out the window now, because they use that as evidence that toddlers are transgender, which is absolutely insane, of course. If you look at the bottom in her notes, it says, "Today I'm going to speak to you all about a topic that's sacred ground to me." So sacred ground, that's, this is supposed to be a professor of biology, which is a science. You can tell we're already way outside the realm of science here. This is not science. This is not anything based on material evidence or the material world. This is sacred ground. That's religious language, which makes sense because that's what this push entirely is. It is religious. Sacred ground to me. Certainly, I have many emotional responses to this subject, and my emotions are sure to surface today, but my goal is to talk about this subject while based on an absolute peer-reviewed, quantifiable scientific manner. I am told by the person I got this from, a former student of Professor Ivy's at BSU, that she did indeed let her emotions surface during this presentation and cried. But that is who we have an option to elect to our legislature. Someone who wants transgender toddlers, and that's sacred ground. Now, one interesting thing that I want to point out before I move on, I'm not going to inflict this whole thing on you, but one interesting thing I just want to mention is that this is not a biological argument. This is not biology. Nothing you see here involves biology. Biology is that sex is determined at the genetic level, chromosomes, XY chromosomes, and she tries to refute that elsewhere in this presentation. But really what this is a linguistic argument. Leftists and LGBTQ activists are not talking about biology anymore. They have moved beyond that to language. And just like, the party in Orwell's 1984, they're trying to alter language to reflect the way they want reality to be, rather than being a reflection of what reality is. So when she says here, sex is a biological categorization, sexuality is the way people experience and express themselves, the gender is a social elaboration of biological sex, that's all meaningless. That's not science. That's just twisting words. That's trying to twist the meaning of words to support this completely unrealistic view of humanity. Obviously, there are, a handful of people, a very small percentage who do have chromosomal issues that, can affect them. And I'm obviously not talking about them, but as usual, leftists will use the marginal cases to try and argue to redefine everything. The way leftists do that, using the small number of people with actual chromosomal issues to argue for, the fact that your toddler might be transgender, is the same way as if you said that, a dog that's born with a missing leg, has a physical deformity, is evidence that there's no, definition of how many legs a dog has. And they would use that to say, well, if you argue that dogs have four legs, then you are, you're erasing all the outliers, and there's nothing normal about four legs. And remember, that's the point of things like Drag Queen Story Hour, as James Lindsay has really explained by reading their own literature, their own peer-reviewed scientific literature, as Professor Ivy might say. They believe that when we protect childhood innocence, we are actually maintaining a structural system of cis heteronormative white supremacy. They really believe that. And they further believe that in order to break that system, they need to expose children to sexual content. They need to expose children as early as possible to all sorts of sexual content, even explicit, what we would call obscene material, because otherwise, how else is that child going to know if he or she or it is trans or non-binary or queer in some other fashion? So they are explicitly grooming our children, or they would like to. And we got to fight back against that. But that's exactly the sort of extremism that our Idaho Democrats espouse. And they try to hide it. They try to obfuscate it. They try to say, oh, well, don't worry about that. Let's talk about water. Let's talk about public education. We all want public education, right? Of course, they want public education in such a way that you can't escape, and you can't escape the indoctrination. But in any case, one interesting thing I saw is how this game is played with left-wing organizations. Back during the primary, I pointed out that the Idaho 97, which claims to be nonpartisan moderate, but really they're leftist, and they might bamboozle a few Republicans into supporting them, but those are the useful idiots, unfortunately. I pointed out that they endorsed Josh Tanner in the primary against Representative Gayan de Mordaunt. And to Josh's credit, to Mr. Tanner's credit, he repudiated that endorsement. But the reason they did that is because they knew that Gayan de Mordaunt was very strong in favor of charter schools and school choice, and supporting having money follow the student. And Tanner did not have really as much of a record on that, so they were figuring, okay, he's going to be the lesser of two evils here. But again, he repudiated that endorsement, and I'm very glad to hear that. However, now the Idaho Education Association is endorsing his opponent, Shelley Brock, because they know that she's going to support public schools and resist efforts to break the public school monopoly, which is what we want. Leftists accuse us of wanting to destroy public schools. And I admit sometimes I've used rhetoric that sounds that way, but I also recognize the public schools are an important institution. Our Idaho State Constitution requires that our legislature fund a free public school system. It doesn't give you any guidance on how that system is to be run, though. It doesn't say it has to be run by public school unions and left-wing advocacy groups, which it is now. So it's not going away, and we don't want it to go away, but we want it to be better. We want to raise test scores. We want to raise achievement. We want to cut out the indoctrination that has crept in there. We want to return to the fundamentals. We want to create students who are able to find jobs in any economy. We want to create students who can think critically and not just accept, whatever the TV news tells them. And we believe that one of the best ways to do that is through competition. If Walmart is the only store in town and they've got dirty bathrooms and high prices and low stock, well, they don't have an incentive to improve unless some other mega store comes in and starts competing. And that's the same thing with any business. Why are DMVs and Social Security offices often so awful? Because they don't have an incentive to improve, because there's nowhere else you can go to get a driver's license or get your Social Security paperwork. But where there's competition, you will see improvement. That's what the entire capitalist system is based on. Public schools, there is competition, but it's sometimes hard for parents and families to utilize that competition. So we do have school choice in Idaho, in that you have a choice to send your children to public school or private school or charter school or micro school or homeschool or whatever. However, for a lot of families, it's difficult to avail themselves of that choice because maybe they're single parents, can't really homeschool. Maybe both parents are working. Again, same problem. Maybe they just don't have the money to send their children to a private school. So I think some form of having money follow students is worthwhile and laudable. Democrats, of course, do not want that. They want to keep children trapped in the schools that they control because they want to be the ones raising your children. They want to be the ones indoctrinating your children. They want they want to keep your children there as a captive audience. And I've heard it said that leftists don't have children, they just take yours, which is often the case. Conservatives are having more children on average than leftists, liberals, progressives, socialists. But they control all these institutions in our society, including public schools. So it's hard to raise our children and maintain them in the values that we believe in. But this game, though, where the Idaho 97 endorsed Tanner in the primary, but then the Idaho Education Association endorsed Shelley Brock in the general, it really is a game they play. When left-wing outlets endorse Republicans in the primary, they're either trying of one of two things. If they assume that the Democrat has no chance, then they want the most left-wing Republican possible to win. On the other hand, they might just want the weakest Republican possible to win. I think my favorite example of this was in the 2008 Republican presidential primary. You had a lot of people running. The New York Times, which has not endorsed a Republican for president in a general election since, I want to say at least since the 1920s. I'd have to go back and look, but they always endorsed the Democrat. Even McGovern, even Mondale. But they endorsed John McCain in the Republican primary. And why did they do that? They said that he was a moderate. They said that he could reach across the aisle, that he had a history of challenging his own party, and therefore he would be the best, one to bring the country together. What did they do the moment he won the primary? Not only did they publish a headline sex scandal that ended up going nowhere, yet they still put it on their front page, they obviously endorsed Barack Obama. And in their endorsement, they said that they endorsed Obama because McCain was a right-wing extremist. Where have we heard that before? But you see, that's the game they play. They try to pick our side's candidate, and then they try to crush them once the general election comes. So, of course, the Idaho Education Association is endorsing Shelley Brock. And, of course, all these left-wing groups are endorsing all the Democrats, even the ones who have no chance. And, make no mistake, they are radical. They are extreme. They try to paint us as the right-wing extremists because we have basically the same views that we had 20 years ago. Meanwhile, they are pushing the envelope. They are pushing this Overton window further and further and further to the left. I guess whichever way it looks on the screen. And yet nobody calls them radical leftists. I mean, we do, but the supposedly mainstream media doesn't. But that's because the mainstream media is radically to the left. And people have to understand that. In many ways, it's subconscious. If you're a reporter at a mainstream news outlet, maybe the Idaho Statesman or the Idaho Capital Sun or Channel 7 TV News, you have your own biases, you have your own worldview, and that's fine. And you look around, you look to your left, and you don't see many people over there because there's not many people more leftist than you. Maybe you see a few, some outspoken socialists or communists or something. The Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wing of the Democratic Party. You look to your right, and you see a couple of moderate Democrats. You see Governor Little, Speaker Bedke, some of the supposedly more establishment moderate Republicans. You look way over to your right, and you see those far-right extremists, like me, like Tammy Nichols, Brian Lenny, Scott Herndon, these great folks who are going to be in the Senate next year. I'm so excited. But from your perspective, it looks like they are far, far right, even though your center line really should be a lot further to the right than it is, especially in a state that is so conservative. We are a red state. If you take all the registered Republicans in Idaho and all the registered Democrats, there are 4 registered Republicans for every 1 registered Democrat. And that split is reflected in our legislature, which has, again, 4 times as many Republicans as Democrats. Yet our media is so far to the left that they think, they think of themselves as the center. And so that's how they cast it. They're not going to see many far leftists, but they'll see a lot of far right extremists. And obviously, I think that effect was in play with my own brush with the media this week. As I've posted it on Substack, although, as I said, the emails aren't going out, so you might have to check the website. Posted it on Twitter, posted it on Facebook. I've been appointed to my city's library board of trustees, and it's very exciting. I love the library. I got my first library card, I want to say, at age 8 or 9. And I've been a fixture there ever since. Most of these books back here, a good portion of these books, especially like the Churchill books here, these came from the Seattle Library book sale. Every 6 months, the Seattle Public Library, or the Friends of the Seattle Public Library, used to hold a book sale, and they would rent out these warehouses at what used to be the Sandpoint Naval Station on the shores of Lake Washington. And it was just full of books, and you could get hardcovers for $1, paperbacks for 25 cents, discs, DVDs and CDs for $1. And people, a lot of people would come in there with massive suitcases, and they'd scan books trying to figure out if it's worth buying, because they were trying to resell them. Me, I just wanted to add to my collection. So I went there a couple of times and filled up and got some great deals. I love books. I love history. I love literature. And I love the library. And so that's why when, I've been advocating for people to get involved with their libraries. Obviously, we see controversies. Should libraries have explicit material that they allow children to see? Who gets to decide what's explicit? I believe the public library is a great institution, and I believe that communities should have a say in how their public libraries are run. And so I've always advocated for conservatives to get involved there. And when an opportunity came up to do that here, I put my money where my mouth was. I applied. I submitted an application. And I was fortunate enough that the mayor decided to appoint me. And, it wasn't just the mayor. I was in an interview with the mayor and the president of the library board and the executive director of the library and the city council liaison to the library. And they all apparently agreed that I was a good choice. And I appreciate that. That's flattering, and I'm excited to start this month with this new endeavor. But if you watch Channel 7 News, then there is something ominous about all this. It is apparently controversial that the mayor of my city would appoint a conservative blogger to the library board. That's what Brian Holmes of KTVB Channel 7 called me. I mean, I guess it's true, but if you watch the whole piece, and I linked it from Substack, it's actually really amusing to see how he frames this. He frames this as if, just by reading my words, that it's enough to condemn me of some sort of Orwellian wrongthink. He never actually explains why it's so controversial that I would be appointed. He assumes that his listeners or watchers or viewers, however many tens of them, he assumes that hearing my words from this, from my Substack, are enough to condemn me as a right-wing extremist and somebody who should not be here. And there's apparently some coordination, because I heard from the mayor and some of the council members that they had received some emails along the same lines, basically sharing what I had written and saying, how could you possibly appoint this person? And I assume one of them reached out to the news to try and make this into a story. And you see the same effect nationwide. See that fellow with CNN, he goes by K-File on Twitter. His name's Andrew Kaczynski, I want to say. He's apparently in trouble again, but I still remember a couple of years ago, there was a young man, he might have been a teenager, maybe in his early 20s, who made a meme. It was from when Donald Trump was involved with the WWE, professional wrestling, and he was going over there and punching someone in the face. Obviously, it's all fake. It's just an act. But this guy took the CNN logo and put it over the guy's face. And so you can see Trump punching the CNN logo and just pummeling it. And he just made this goofy meme and shared it. Well, Andrew Kaczynski did not like that. They figured out who made it and threatened to dox him, threatened to release his personal information if he ever did anything like that again. That was CNN. So it's a normal thing for leftist news media to use their power and influence to try and push society in the direction they want it to go. In this case, you have Mr. Holmes of Channel 7 doesn't like the idea of a conservative blogger being on a library board, and so he's going to use his megaphone, or such as it is, to try and interfere with the process. But the process is done. I have been appointed. I will be there for 5 years, and I hope to get some things done. I hope to really, the reason I wanted to be involved is because I want to protect what is already good about our library. I love our library. If you read my official statement that I put out, the library was really one of the first things that we found when we moved here, because it was, like I said, I've been part of libraries most of my life, but I never had one like the Eco Library, and I'm so excited to be able to be a part of it and be an ambassador for it. So, yeah, I mean, if people are expecting me to do something radical on day one, then I guess they'll be disappointed. I'm actually curious to see if Mr. Holmes or one of his compatriots shows up at the first board meeting that I'll be attending. It's I believe it's on the third Wednesday of this month. So go ahead and show up, and I'm afraid you're probably going to be disappointed, but yeah, you're welcome. One thing I noticed about Holmes's piece is that, again, there's really no substance to it. He doesn't explain why I'm supposed to be this big bad boogeyman. And it reminded me of the decline of late night comedy. Back in the day, you had Jay Leno and David Letterman, and of course Johnny Carson before that, and they were genuinely funny. They were equal opportunity. They poked fun at all sides. But in the mid 2000s, you got this strain of late night comedy hosts, Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert. Now you've got John Oliver and Trevor Noah, who's just announced he's stepping down. And their brand of humor is not really funny, and it's basically one-sided. Their entire shtick is that they point and laugh at somebody who's in the out group, somebody who's not part of their clique. And of course, their clique is leftist progressive. So they'll take a conservative, post something he said, and then just wait for laughter. It's literally like the pointing and screaming in the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They're pointing and saying, "You are not one of us." And that was the entire substance of Holmes's piece. This guy who is not one of us is getting this position that belongs to us. So, but they can, as my friend Dustin Hurst always says, they can cry more. Speaking of TV news, they really are the lowest common denominator. I've really appreciated the ability with the internet now as it is to get more long-form discussions. Right before this started, I was catching up with yesterday's Timcast IRL. Tim Pool had his regular guests, but as well as Will Chamberlain, who I don't agree with on everything, but he's a very smart guy, and I enjoy his perspective. But you get these people, you get to hear them sit down and just talk about issues for 2 hours and really dive into them and look at things in different ways. That's why Joe Rogan became popular. That it's really such a difference from TV news, which, the hit piece on me was less than 3 minutes long. How much context can you fit in that amount of time? You turn on the news, whether it's local news or Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and you're going to get little snippets. And they don't have time to really dig into it. Even Tucker Carlson, who I like, his show, he'll go into an issue, do his monologue, and then he'll have a guest on for 5 minutes, maybe. So they'll be able to say one or two things, and that's it. You're not going to really get any context. You're not going to get any depth. And so if you tune in to TV news and you think that you're informed, you're really missing out on a lot. You got to dig a lot deeper. Shaking the screen there, getting excited. And nowhere is that more evident than in this coverage of the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, the things are escalating. Someone bombed the Nord Stream pipelines last week. These gas pipelines that carry natural gas from Russia to Europe, to Germany. Somebody blew them up. And if you watch any U.S. media, whether left or right, Fox or CNN, of course it was the Russians. Even though it doesn't make any sense for the Russians to blow up their own pipeline. But we're supposed to accept that. And we're supposed to just accept that without any evidence, without any words. Just open up a map here and have a visual aid. There we go. So there is Europe. So the Nord Stream pipelines, they come out of, Russia up here, come down through the Baltic Sea, come down here, and then come over to Germany. And someone blew up both of them. Now, maybe it was just faulty engineering, although why would both of them blow up at the same time? That seems, could it have been Russia? I mean, anything's possible, but if Russia wanted to shut down natural gas to Germany, all they had to do was push a button on their end. Why would they go and blow it up? Especially since the Baltic Sea, where the explosion actually happened, it was closer to the German side. How, they would have had to really sneak in there to do it. Poland is here, the Baltic states are here, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and of course the US has a presence here. In fact, apparently the US was doing drills over the spot where the explosion happened just the day before. So take that for what you will. I'm not saying I know anything. I'm just looking at the evidence that's there. And the question to remember is always, who benefits? Winter is coming. Europe is going to get cold unless they can have something to heat their homes. And because they've decided to shut down their own energy production and shut down their nuclear reactors because of this misguided environmental push, they need Russian natural gas. Now, of course, most of Europe has been supporting Ukraine in this conflict. They've been providing them with money and arms and moral support. But with winter coming and Russian gas needed to heat their homes, there was a chance that countries like Germany were going to say, Ukraine, you did a good job. You fought hard. You went above and beyond, but we need Russia's help to avoid freezing to death. So we're going to call this good. Why don't you go negotiate? We're not going to support you anymore. Or something like that. So whose interest was it really to blow up these pipelines? Was it Russia's? Now they have no bargaining chip. Now they can't say, here's natural gas in exchange for cutting off support for Ukraine. That option is gone. So who benefits? Ukraine? Maybe. The United States? Possibly. Someone on Timcast's show actually suggested maybe it was China because they want to see us continue fighting. Russia really seems like the least likely option. But again, where I'm going with this is that if you just watch Fox News or CNN or local news, you don't get any of this, anything more in depth than, oh, Russia blew up the pipelines because our government says so. And of course, they would never lie. And this whole conflict has been like that. If you just watch Fox News or CNN, you think that this was an unprovoked invasion by Russia for no reason other than Putin's, grand designs. And he's just like Hitler, trying to gobble up territory. They won't tell you about the fact that there's been a low-level civil war in the Donbass region for the last 8 years. They won't tell you that most of the people in the regions that Russia is attempting to annex are ethnically Russian. They speak Russian. They have Russian culture. They feel a closer kinship to Russia than to Ukraine. If you look at pictures of the Ukrainian elections in 2004 and 2014, you'll find that support for the Russian-leaning Viktor Yanukovych was greatest in those regions, in those 4 provinces, because they're ethnically Russian. And so they supported a man who wanted closer ties with Russia and at the expense of ties with Europe. And guess what happened in both 2004 and 2014? Coups, sponsored by America and Western organizations. 2004, the Bush administration lent support to the uprising that ousted Yanukovych the first time. And in 2014, Obama and Biden lent support to the uprising, the Maidan uprising that ousted Yanukovych the second time. And remember what happened in those chain of events. 2014, put yourself back there. Barack Obama's president, Joe Biden is vice president. In the spring of 2014, Yanukovych is the president. he has just shelved a trade deal with the European Union, and he's going to sign a trade deal with Russia. He has also extended the lease on Russia's naval base at Sevastopol on the Black Sea, on the Crimean Peninsula, which his predecessor had indicated that he was going to terminate. Let me flip back to the map here, just because maps are cool. So you see that is Sevastopol, either Ukrainian or Russian, depending on who you ask. But for Russia, back in the days of the Soviet Union, this was their only warm water naval port. Everything else is way up here up north where it freezes in the winter, Murmansk. And so after Crimea was actually part of Russia originally. During the 1950s, in 1954, Premier Khrushchev transferred it from the Russian SSR to the Ukrainian SSR. Why? Nobody really knows, but I suspect it was kind of an olive branch because Khrushchev had exposed a lot of Stalin's crimes, including the Holodomor, the forced starvation of over 1 million Ukrainians. So perhaps he was trying to make nice, but what does it matter? They're both part of the USSR, right? Well, then the USSR collapses, and each of those SSRs breaks into their own country. And so Ukraine ends up now with the Crimean Peninsula. Well, Russia still had their naval base there, so they signed a lease with the Ukrainians to pay for it, which is fine. We do the same thing with Cuba. It's actually a funny story. After we helped liberate Cuba from Spain in the Spanish-American War in 1898, we signed a lease with the new Cuban government for the Guantanamo Bay naval base. After Castro took over, we kept paying them money. It was kind of a pittance, just a token sum, but we would pay them every year. And Castro refused to cash our checks, essentially. He refused to accept the payment because he claims that we are not welcome there and that we need to relinquish Guantanamo Bay. Yet we've maintained it. So it's one of those things where it's, I don't know, do as I say, not as I do. So when Yanukovych indicated that he was going to extend the lease on the naval base after he was reelected in 2014, and he was going to sign this trade deal with Russia. So what happens in the spring of 2014? You have the Maidan uprising. You have this spontaneous protest. It turns out that American CIA assets and American State Department assets and various other American connected organizations like the Center for Democracy or whatever they call it were involved, and they were paying money to help this uprising start. And Yanukovych flees, and they put in a new president. It was a coup. It was a coup that ousted the pro-Russian leader. Well, after that, there's a sequence of events where Joe Biden, the vice president at the time, goes there to congratulate the people of Ukraine on restoring democracy. That same month, his son Hunter is appointed to the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, paying him almost 6 figures a month. Coincidence? Maybe. At the same time, Putin, now seeing that he was probably going to lose access to the naval base at Sevastopol, goes in and annexes Crimea. Now, they have a referendum, and we reject it because we say it's, what was fixed. And maybe it was, but at the same time, who are we to say after our 2020 elections? Who's to decide whether an election is legitimate? Is it just in, the interests of whoever's talking? But and then these regions, got to turn the map back on. These regions in the south and east, they rebel against Kiev. They say, we want to be independent because we don't like what's going on. We don't agree with that coup, the Maidan coup, and so we don't want to be part of that. And so they launch a rebellion, and it starts this low-level civil war. And that's in 2014. Now, remember the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton is making noise about getting stronger against Putin. And when it looks like Trump starts winning, and then he eventually does win, what's their go-to play? They say he's colluding with Russia. This conflict has been at the center of American politics now for at least 8 years, if not 18 years. because our leaders have been so invested in the Ukrainian regime. It's like a money laundering operation for them. They send their sons there to rake in the cash, and in the meantime, I don't even know what Ukraine gets out of the deal, but I'm sure it's connected to energy because everything is. And that brings us back to the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. Even Republicans for years have said that stopping Nord Stream 2 was a priority of our government. Why? Why does it matter whether Germany signs an agreement to pump gas from Russia? Why does that matter to us? Do you think George Washington or John Adams uh, would be so invested in a foreign nation's energy like that? Well, it's because we've set up this new liberal world order, and it's a house of cards, and it's starting to collapse, and our leaders are trying to hold on one way or the other as much as they can. So I'm not saying I'm right on everything. I'm not saying just trust me, but I'm just saying think about all those things when you hear about issues like that, when you watch the news, because the news isn't going to give you any of that context. They're just going to say, bad guy do this, good guy do this, rah, rah, America. And it's frustrating, but it is what it is. The good thing is that TV news is probably on its way out. I'm sorry to say, Mr. Holmes, but what's your demographics for TV news? They probably skew a little bit older, don't they? Young people are going to the internet to get a variety of news sources, and I think that's good. I think the time when a few TV stations controlled the flow of information is coming to an end, and that's a great thing because we've seen what can happen when information is controlled by just a few, especially when those few do not have our best interests at heart. Now, of course, they call this disinformation and misinformation and fake news, but that's because, like the liberal world order, they are struggling to hold on to a rapidly collapsing system. And honestly, that's a good thing. That's really about all I had to say today. I could go on about the historical context because that's really my thing. I enjoy history, but I don't want to bore everyone else. It's already been almost an hour, so I suppose I will let you go. I've got things to do. I've got to get back to work writing that piece for the IFF. Maybe we'll see it next week. And of course, don't forget to go to gemstate.substack.com, subscribe. I give everything away for free, although those who have generously upgraded to paid subscriptions, I very much appreciate it. And I will be coming up with some special bonuses for paid subscribers very soon. But in the meantime, subscribe there and follow me on Twitter, GemStateBrian. And have a great weekend. Have a great fall. I will see you all again soon. May God bless.